It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Joseph Caravalho, Md, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine. He leads a congressionally authorized not-for-profit organization of 2,800 employees who advance military medicine at local locations throughout the United States and around the world. Before joining HGF, then Major General Carvalho culminated his 38-year military career as the Joint Staff Surgeon, where he was the senior medical advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Immediately prior, he was the Army Deputy Surgeon General. He is a graduate of Gonzaga University and the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Clinically, he served as a staffed internist, nuclear medicine physician, and cardiologist. Operationally, he served as the senior medical officer for a number of Army and Joint Special Operations units, including the 1st Special Forces Group, 75th Ranger Regiment, and the United States Army Special Operations Command. He also has 2 combat deployments in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So I present to you Dr. Carvalho.
But Dave, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Now, I have given many talks in my time on active duty, but I have to tell you, I was a bit nervous about speaking to you all tonight with this august audience. For pointers, I asked Dave, what do you want me to talk about? And he looked at me and he said, I'd like you to talk about 15 minutes. Now, in the Army, they'll say there are 2 things you shouldn't do. One is, don't ever give a lieutenant a compass. And the other is, don't ever give a general a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure to be here this evening, and I am grateful to share my story as an American of Chinese heritage. Now, looking at me, you're probably thinking, hey, this dude doesn't look Chinese. Indeed, I am half Chinese and half Puerto Rican. Now, if you think about that, do some mental math, you realize I'm a test tube Filipino. Now, how did this combination come about? Now, I was born and raised in Hawaii. Mahalo. What's interesting about that is that I was born in Hawaii before it was a state, and my birth certificate says Territory of Hawaii. Now, you're just going to have to trust me on that, because those of us from Hawaii don't like to show our birth certificates to people. I'm going to warn you that my story is, I think, atypical. It's not just that I'm a Chinese American born in Hawaii, but that I'm a 3rd generation Chinese American. You see, in the latter part of the 19th century, thousands of laborers from China, Portugal, Japan, Korea, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and many other countries were brought to Hawaii to work the sugarcane plantations. Many of these immigrants came over with the intent of making money, sending it home, and then later returning themselves. Well, virtually nobody left, and Hawaii became a melting pot of ethnicities, cultures, and beliefs. Now, before you start imagining I lived an exotic, tropical life, spoiler alert, I grew up in a blue-collar family, and I assure you there was nothing exciting about my upbringing. My parents finished high school early, not because they were academically gifted, but because they were needed in the workforce. As teenagers, they lived through the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the fear of future attacks. I was the first son in the middle of 5 children. My father was a police officer. My mother stayed at home until my youngest the youngest sibling, 5 years my junior, started school. Then my mom had a succession of jobs, ranging from, and what we said at the time, a restaurant waitress to a hotel maid to a pantry cook. My father spent time on the vice squad, then ended his career as a motor patrolman. There wasn't much money to be made by either one, but every penny was made honestly. And virtually every last cent was spent on our education. We 5 children attended Catholic elementary and high schools. My grade school was a couple of miles from home, and my younger siblings and I would walk home every day. During high school, I commuted 20 miles by city bus. And with afternoon sports, you learned very quickly that you had to do your homework before you fell asleep at home. You had to do your homework on the bus. Now, growing up, I liked helping people. Early on, we would have the local priest would come and have dinner with us on Sundays. And I thought maybe I'd become a priest. As it turns out, I didn't. I just became a father. But but once he came over, and I said, Father, I want to be like you. I'd like to go to the cemetery. And he says, I'm pretty sure you will get there. Now, I was pretty good at math as well. My father advised me to be an accountant. Now, that didn't resonate with me. Not that there's anything wrong with accountants, but I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was that I was going to forge my own path in life. It was a high school teacher, actually, that asked me, somewhat rhetorically, Joe, do you know that you can be anything you want to be in this world? I never thought about my future that way before. If my folks provided me guidance, I hadn't matured enough to hear that. I knew I liked helping people, and that's very simply how I decided to become a physician. The summer before heading to college, I worked at the Dole Pineapple Cannery, literally pushing 40,000 pineapples into a coring machine from 10 at night until 6 in the morning every day for the entire summer. My mom gave me bus money to get to and from work in the city, and I ate a home lunch every day. I saved every penny to help my folks pay for school. When I got to Spokane, Washington, and registered for classes, I realized, sadly, the $1,200 I saved from work would only cover my room and board expenses for 1 semester. I knew then I couldn't afford college. My folks hadn't said anything, but I knew they couldn't afford to have me continue there. I was a good student, but my scholarships weren't enough. I ruled out work-study options because I felt I needed to study every free moment possible to get into medical school. I attended a barbecue that the ROTC program put together before classes started, and someone told me I could apply for a 3-year scholarship which would pay for my tuition completely. Up to that point, I had not thought about the military at all. I called my mom. I told her about this situation, and she said, well, if you're going to join ROTC, join the Air Force because only dummies go in the Army. They only had Army ROTC, so I was stuck. Now, I rationalized I could be responsible for my own college expenses. I could pay for school with my Army service after college. My folks wouldn't have to take out loans, and I thought if I died, my mom would get a flag. Well, it wasn't long before I fell in love with the Army, the idea of the Army, and I switched from wanting to become a physician to wanting to become an Army officer and hoping I'd become a physician. Actually, I wanted to do both. I ended up being both. Now, as David mentioned, I just completed a 38-year career as an Army physician, having retired last year as a Major General. My proudest moment about that, now I told you about my mom, is she told, and she never drove. She was too afraid to drive. So she would take the city bus. So she told me, after I told her I had been selected to be a general, when the bus stopped, again, this is a city bus now, by her house, she told the bus driver, hang on for a second. As she walked down, she turned around and she says, everybody on the city bus. I gotta tell you, I'm so happy my son just made general. The very best feeling for me. Now, as a soldier, as David mentioned, I was an Airborne Ranger Special Forces officer with additional training as a scuba diver and a flight surgeon. I spent 11 years assigned to airborne units, 7 of which were with special operations. As a physician, I trained and practiced in internal medicine, nuclear medicine, and invasive cardiology. So this really did well for me. It was great for bar tricks, right? As a special forces officer and a cardiologist, I could kill you and then bring you back to life. As a general officer, I led tertiary care medical centers, large health regions, and global medical research and development commands. I served as the Army's Deputy Surgeon General, then completed my military career at the Pentagon as a senior military medical advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So how did a skinny Chinese Puerto Rican kid from Hawaii end up a nuclear cardiologist, a Major General, the Army's Deputy Surgeon General, and ultimately the Joint Staff Surgeon? Or how did I land my current job as President and CEO of a $500 million not-for-profit organization? I never thought of myself as disadvantaged, nor did I think I was given a jump start because I was a minority. All I ever wanted was to have a chance. Over the years, I willingly put myself up against anyone and everyone. The Army is a great meritocracy, and I excelled in that environment. So the real question is, how did I become competitive? So here's my family secret. My folks sacrificed life's luxuries to give us 5 children good educations. They taught us the value of discipline, hard work, and fortitude. Authority figures were to be respected, and rules were to be followed. It was important to be both gracious and selfless. Above all, my parents gave each of us the tools of strong faith and moral character. This incredibly selfless and loving investment in me gave me lifelong opportunities to compete and to compete well. Most importantly, I acknowledge most of these traits were instilled in me by my mom, my Chinese American mom. Like a good mother, my mom has always been an encouraging spirit. Now, just before she passed away recently, she told me she hopes I make it someday. I hope so too, I told her. So if you will allow me to change direction a bit, with Veterans Day around the corner, I can't leave without mentioning a very special veteran. In the 1850s, a Connecticut ship captain adopted a young Chinese boy who he brought back with him to the United States. His adoptive son chose the name Joseph Peirce. As a young man, Peirce enlisted in the Connecticut Volunteer Infantry in 1862. Having participated in the Civil War's major campaigns, including Antietam and Gettysburg, it is believed Corporal Peirce achieved the highest rank of any Chinese American to serve in the Union Army. He, along with the over 50 other Asian Pacific Islander soldiers of the Civil War, were honored through a U.S. House of Representatives resolution in 2008. Peirce's legacy is indelibly inked in history. And so too is my story, at least my story up to this very moment. I feel I've contributed to the history of this country. I don't think my contributions are because I share a Chinese heritage, but I feel the fact that I share a Chinese heritage makes our country's history richer. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what this museum intends to do. Tell the myriad stories of Chinese Americans that together paint the picture of integral contributions that forged this country into the greatest nation on earth. Not in spite of its people, but because of its people. No story is more important than any other, but not telling a story leaves a gap in our knowledge and understanding of our country's history. Please use your experience, your expertise, and your influence to help shape this museum to be a landmark in our nation's capital of what Chinese Americans have contributed to this nation. As I close my talk tonight, please consider the Chinese Americans and all the Americans who are deployed this evening to lands far from home to defend this country's ideas of freedom and democracy. May God bless them. May God bless their loved ones at home who long for their safe return. May God bless everyone here tonight, and may God bless America. Thank you very much, everyone.